So we will now move to the next part of our program, which flows nicely and is very exciting, a contribution. We have a panel now with some wonderful experts from the library science community, CBK and the Library of the Future, anticipating the second knowledge revolution. I am going to turn the camera over to the moderator for this session, Chris Schaefer. He's a university librarian and assistant vice chancellor for academic information management at the University of California, San Francisco. He's also a member of the MCBK steering committee and co-chair of the MCBK technical infrastructure work group. So Chris, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much. Here from the comfort of my home, I'm happy to start talking to you about the future of libraries and the Library of the Future, which my library is right there, just behind the bridge. At any rate, I'm really glad to see all of you. My job here, aside from cracking a small joke, is to introduce our speakers and get out of the way so that they can tell you a lot of things about the Library of the Future. We have a really great panel for you, really good librarians and library workers who have some interesting things to tell you about what they're doing in their libraries, the thoughts that they've had about MCBK, and how libraries can be involved in it. Joining me today for moderation duty is Terry Wheeler, who is the director of the Samuel J. Wood Library at Weill Cornell Medicine. She was hired to build a 21st century library program, no small task. She's stood up 6 new library research services, including a repository for patient data sets called the Weill Cornell Data Core. She's currently exploring library support for MCBK, and I'm happy to have her here with me as my co-moderator. Terry will be eagerly awaiting your comments, questions, and whatever else you want to put in the chat, where she will be collecting those over the course of these 4 speakers and then running the question and answer session at the end. So please enter your questions into the chat as we go along. Terry will collect them all, and we will have a panel question and answer at the end, moderated by Terry. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker. I'm happy to introduce Christy Holmes, the director of the Galter Health Sciences Library and Learning Center, and associate professor of preventive medicine in the Division of Health and Biomedical Informatics at the Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine. She also serves as an associate director at the Northwestern Clinical and Translational Sciences Institute, where she leads evaluation for the Institute. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christy, who will be telling us about challenging the innovation imperative.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Chris. And thanks everyone for the opportunity to join you today at MCBK. So today I'd like to share some perspectives about where and how innovation occurs in the context of infrastructure systems and maintenance workflows, much as those as you might see in a city, such as shown on this slide. And I'd like to explore the critical role that collaboration plays in advancing progress in this area. So my thinking here was influenced dramatically a couple of years ago by this article, Hail the Maintainers, where a deep dive into the role of maintainers and those individuals who are dedicated to the advancement and the reliability of maintenance systems was presented in the context of innovation. And so that's really helped me to grow and think about my own perspectives here, and has influenced the way that we're thinking about innovation and maintenance and infrastructure in our library. And so I'm going to share some of that with you today. So are we adequately recognizing and building on excellence? What is innovation itself? And what myths exist about innovation? So thinking about myths about innovation, it might be that iconic light bulb picture, or the idea of a great white innovator. The individuals who are usually highlighted as innovators often are wearing, they're many times white men in lab coats. But I think we all can think of examples in our lives or in our society where innovations have been made that are truly under-recognized. Consider the Ott family here in this picture, somewhere in Kansas during the Great Depression. They removed their back tire and added a drive belt, and they were able to build an automated automobile-powered washing machine. So this is a terrific example of innovation in ways that can have a significant and meaningful impact on people's everyday lives, but definitely doesn't live up to the mythology of what innovation is. Innovation that happens under the hood, much as like what we might see here, through maintenance of infrastructure systems, can be largely invisible, as are the people who carry out these important roles. And like so many other facets of society, can be especially impacted through issues related to racism or other biases. So the key questions that our library is thinking about as we carry out our mission at Feinberg School of Medicine is influenced by these points and all of these issues surrounding innovation and maintenance. The questions that I've outlined here help us prioritize what's important, be creative problem solvers, and carry out our work proactively through diverse and inclusive collaborations. So as Chris mentioned, I lead evaluation and continuous improvement for our Translational Sciences Institute, which I'll just shorten to NUCATS. Through that role, I'm afforded the opportunity to sit on the leadership team. It's a great opportunity for both vertical integration, so across the programs and centers in NUCATS, which are shown here on the left-hand side, as well as horizontal integration. So by horizontal integration in translation, I'm referring to that integration from basic science to improved health of our communities. So what does this look like in reality? Well, we approach our work in NUCATS in a manner very similar to the way we approach our work in the library. We build heavily on infrastructure, inclusiveness, and operationalized processes. You can see the range of domains we collaborate with in the purple box at the bottom, with evaluation and informatics and data science being our most active areas of growth and collaboration, both of which are highly dependent on data and infrastructure to be successful. Pulling together data, tools, people, and processes and perspectives, and then operationalizing where possible affords us new opportunities to make the data work for us and continually evaluate and improve processes. At the heart of every Translational Sciences Institute is collaboration. Collaboration can be seen in the relationships we form with other organizations, as well as how we carry out our everyday work. One particular effective collaborative activity that's been synergistic for NUCATS and Galter Library are these NUCATS studios. A NUCATS studio is where a group or an individual who are proposing new work or a grant get together with individuals who represent the different programs and centers in NUCATS, and we talk about, what can we bring to the table? How can we contribute in order to help enhance the proposal? The downstream impacts from these studio activities are immense. And so you will have often a number of subsequent collaborations and opportunities resulting from a single studio. So I'd like to share one example. Here in the middle of the screen, we see the Chicago Cancer Health Equity Collaborative. It's a collaboration across the University of Illinois, Chicago, Northeastern Illinois University, and Northwestern to advance cancer health equity through meaningful scientific discovery, education, training, and community engagement. During their proposal process, they had a NUCATS studio. During that studio, I ended up joining the team to lead evaluation and continuous improvement for Chicago Check. But that's not where the story ends. So because of this collaboration, we were able to work together on efforts to be able to build infrastructure to support knowledge about clinical trials and preventive resources in our community in partnership with the Chicago Public Library, as well as with the Healthy Chicago Initiative in the Chicago Department of Public Health. We've also been able to enhance relationships with existing collaborators like our libraries at UIC and Chicago who serve on the advisory committee. It's important to note that this has also resulted in even subsequent collaborations and engagement because we've been able to grow those this initial project into an opportunity to work at the branch levels across the city. And we're really afforded a unique and wonderful opportunity to get to know Chicago. So successful collaboration also depends heavily on the individuals participating in collaboration. I just wanted to take an opportunity to share with you a project about 14 one-page profiles that we developed at Personas Library to try and understand better those individuals who are participating in translational science and have tried to use this as an opportunity to better understand the translational workforce. As this audience knows, research is becoming more and more collaborative. Northwestern developed a new regular faculty track to recognize and help create opportunities for individuals who are making significant and substantial contributions to infrastructure and team-based initiatives on campus through our Team Scientist faculty track. So this was implemented in 2015 and in a highly collaborative effort itself. Faculty promoted through the Team Scientist faculty track identify critical references through their promotion process, and then are able to highlight their contributor roles in those individual activities or research products, helping to provide context and actually a very rich narrative to critical work that can sometimes be invisible through traditional academic mechanisms, but are truly essential to drive research forward. So what are some of the ways that individuals and organizations are investing in this system in order to promote best practices here? Certainly, open science has been a significant effort. I think we all recognize that there are numerous benefits and challenges across this spectrum of activity, including this idea about reciprocity, that open science is about mutual benefit across groups, countries, perspectives, and so on. And I truly believe that the opportunities here lie with creating an ecosystem that supports and empowers radical participation. So participation can happen in all ways. I think any mention of open science is required to have the acronym FAIR, and so here it is. FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reproducible, which is a standard for encouraging best practices around data. So our library, we're just like so many other libraries around the world teaching and supporting FAIR best practices. But we're also doing things, again, under the hood that you may not recognize. We're spending time optimizing metadata standards, improving our discovery workflows, and so on to make it easy for people to be able to engage in best practices. This paper came out, I believe, last week, around that kind of an approach, and I encourage you to take a look. So open science sounds great, but it's not for everyone. Access to technology and resources can severely impact our practice of openness, as can various financial and social barriers to scientists related to their role, status, and the academic culture in which they practice. To address these barriers meaningful, they must first be recognized by the open science community to advance transparent and accessible science for all. So our team's been working on a large international collaboration to try and advance some of these challenges around open science and make it more accessible to all. We're participating in a project led by CERN and the Zenodo team to develop a turnkey next generation research data management repository called Invenio RDM. I'm incredibly excited about the technical components of this project, all of the bells and whistles that help us practice, best practices around data. But actually, I'm particularly inspired by this concept of turnkey. So when you have a turnkey tool, that means that installation and maintenance of that tool is no longer such a significant obviously, I'm not going to go through all of this, but I did want to mention that development on the Invenio RDM platform has been exceedingly user-focused. So we're thinking a lot about this next generation concept, and indeed, what kind of behaviors do we want to try and empower, and what technologies are essential in order to make that happen. We want to do this in a way that is platform agnostic, so that there are accepted, reproducible, and dependable workflows in order to empower better discovery, sharing, and so on, regardless of where you are or what tools you're using. And then along the user services perspective, I did also want to share, we've been thinking a lot about use cases. What does this mean in practice? What does this mean in reality? And we have a number of wonderful partners on campus who have helped us dive into this, and who are already using the repository to be able to carry out some of this work. So one example here, it kind of goes across the spectrum of some of the things that are happening in translational science, but I did want to highlight our friends in Chicago Czech over on the right-hand side of the slide, where we're using the concept of a repository as a way to be able to actually help empower and give credit to our partners in the community who are essential for this work to move forward. We have been up to this point, unfortunately, stuck in some of the by institutional systems, unable to recognize individuals who aren't part of our HR system. And so we're really excited about this and looking forward to making advancements here. So libraries do empower a collaborative ecosystem. And thinking about the questions I asked earlier, where are we going, how do we get there, and who's along for the ride? Those are important to help us think about this more fully as we attempt to make progress here in a meaningful, sustainable, inclusive, and ethical way. I'd just like to close by encouraging everyone to take a look at this wonderful essay that was written last month, talking about data sharing in the context of COVID. And it was written by Daniela Lowenberg at the University of California Curation Center, where Daniela suggests important key points are realigning our priorities to focus on what's most important, act ethically, and then build the future, but build it together. So thank you for your time. This is a reflection of a terrific team at Galter, as well as many wonderful and meaningful collaborations that we are beyond grateful for. So thank you, and I will pass the baton back to Chris.
I'm on mute. That's the catchphrase of the Zoom generation. So thank you so much, Christy. That was really informative. I'm going to have to go back and look at your slides again after this is over to recap everything. I would like to second, by the way, the recommendation for Daniela Lowenberg's article and a lot of the work and writing that she's done around Dryad and other things being done at the California Digital Library. So with that, our second speaker today is Violetta Illick, currently at Columbia University, where she is the head of digital collections and preservation systems. But as of July 1st, she will be the dean of university libraries at Adelphi University. She also serves as the co-chair of the executive board of directors of Force 11, which is working to transform scholarly communication. So with that, I will turn it over to Violetta.
Thank you, Chris, for the lovely introduction, and thank you all for having me today. As part of the panel, I was asked to discuss the role of technical systems in the knowledge revolution. The title of my talk is taken from the book The Life of Reason by George Santayana. In a moving world, readaptation is the price of longevity. I believe this perfectly emphasizes a core feature of libraries, the constant change in order to make the library's experience an enriching one for all of its users. That doesn't mean that we need to dispose of what we do best, to forget our core values. In the same paragraph, Santayana adds that retentiveness is the condition of progress. It means that we need to be lifelong learners, willing to improve, build on what we already understand. It means that we simultaneously need to question the ways we do things, self-reflect, be creative, while keeping in mind the accumulated institutional wisdom and add to it. Some of us attending this virtual event work in academic research institutions where learning, teaching, research, publishing, innovation, critical inquiry happens. We advance learning, teaching, and research excellence by providing expansive collections that support critical inquiry and knowledge creation for the benefit of society. These collections, in order to support both progress and longevity, must combine retention and adaptation features, both on the level of content. For example, we keep Plato and we add Martha Nussbaum. We keep St. Augustine and we add Martin Luther King. We keep Beethoven and we add Eminem, for example. And on the level of form, use every available form to make everything accessible everywhere and to everyone. We provide intellectual access to the vast collections by planning and building those collections. We need to be constantly aware of the impact and application of technological developments that underlie many of the changes observed in library procedures, patron-initiated practices, and partnering arrangements for acquiring materials, licensing agreements, and cooperative and collaborative collection development. We need to be flexible and responsive to changing conditions in the professional environment as well as the information industry. One of the biggest things for me in the library is the preservation and conservation and the digital preservation tasks that happen. Preservation and conservation goals is to prolong the existence and accessibility of the collections for current and future students and scholars by acting to prevent deterioration of physical materials through correct housing and environment, through disaster preparedness, and through staff and user education. Where possible, acting to improve the condition of materials through conservation treatment, and when necessary, acting to change their format in order to preserve their intellectual content, including converting analog content to digital form. We understand how essential this task is, especially now where we are all forced to work from home and everything has shifted online. Once again, we see the two crucial features hand in hand, retention and adaptation. Another area of libraries where academic librarians are actually unique educators in that they often work outside of the structures of the traditional student-teacher relationship. While some teach credit-bearing courses, many librarians are still teaching single-session classes at the reference desk and in individual research consultations. Instead of evaluating student work and assigning grades, librarians create lessons that facilitate the learning of information-seeking skills and information literacy through processes. The goal is to challenge ourselves to work constantly on developing our cultural, social competence, learning to understand the cultures of the students we are likely to work with and overcome any communication difficulties. In the scholarly communication services, we make collection decisions informed by strategies and values that incorporate transforming the processes of creating, disseminating, collecting, storing, managing, and preserving scholarly inputs and outputs toward openness and increased access. So the technological breakthroughs and societal transformations are the core of the issues we are facing today. I will wrap up with this same statement, but I just want to give you a few examples. For example, one of my guiding motto while working at the library has been, can be summarized by this Stroud quote from 1956, where she says that we may be so blinded by firmly established customs that we are incapable of seeing some utterly simple alternatives which might quickly resolve our problems and which will someday look so easy and obvious that our descendants will in turn look upon us as unseeing and unimaginative. We don't want to be those people, right? One of my biggest inspiration in the work in libraries and the whole technical ecosystem is the work done lately by Sir Tim Berners-Lee and the Solid platform. Dr. Ruben Verberg, a professor from Ghent University, has a fantastic collection of papers, presentations, and blog posts that actually work toward this and emphasize the big paradigm shift for the decentralized web. Why is this important? The three paradigm shifts we need to prepare for if we want to build web applications with a decentralized mindset. That means end users become data controllers, right? This is the most well-known decentralization aspect. We want to store data in places of our choice, which improves privacy and improves control. Apps, all the applications actually become the views. As apps become decoupled from the data, they start acting as interchangeable views rather than the single gateway to that data. Interfaces become queries. Data will be distributed across highly diverse interfaces, so sustainable apps need declarative contracts instead of custom data requests. So what does this mean? For example, here, the paradigm shift 1, you can see that author's name and the latest profile picture are stored in an author personal data pod. So the author selects where is that pod, right? They are in control of their own data. All the work-related opinion about an article are stored in the data pod of author's company. Discussed article title and photo, they are stored in news websites data pod. Likes on this post, each one in different individuals data pod. Comments on this post, each in different individuals data pods. So this means that we want to be in control of the data. We want to be the ones deciding with whom we share the data. For example, this is very simple view, basically explaining the paradigm shift 2, where centralized web applications are compared to the decentralized web applications. As we all know, LinkedIn, Doodle, Facebook, they all are applications that store, we give them the data and they store it for us. Same for LinkedIn, same for everything else. In the decentralized web ecosystem, the data is in the personal data pod. And from that personal data pod, the individual owning the data pod decides where and how they want to share their pictures, their social feeds, their articles, their blog posts, their presentations, and so on. This is another, this is the third paradigm shift, where you see exactly how this data flow will happen. So it's very important for libraries to provide platforms and tools for researchers to share their work, traditional and non-traditional scholarly outputs. We also need to be mindful of what kind of tools we implement to safeguard institutional constituents' privacy rights. The contemporary research communication paradigm operates under a diverse set of societal constraints, which influence how units of research information and personal data are created and exchanged. Economic forces and non-interoperable system designs mean that researcher identifiers and researcher contributions are largely shaped and controlled by third-party entities. Participation requires the use of proprietary systems. The feasibility of a decentralized and interoperable information space where researchers can control their identifiers while fulfilling the core function of scientific communication, registration, awareness, certification, and archiving is possible, especially since the technology is already available. The W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, has a vast amount of standards that are already available for us to use. So the technology is there. What's missing is the societal transformation and the societal acceptance and the change that we need to make, mindfully made that change to be able to move forward with the decentralized architecture. Like I said, and actually Dr. Sarvan Kapadisley, author of this image, has discussed multiple times in his papers presentation and in his doctoral dissertation that the societal change lags 25 to 50 years behind the technology. Using the framework of web architecture and loosely coupling the four functions, an accessible and inclusive ecosystem can be realized whereby users are able to use and switch between interoperable applications without interfering with existing data. And just so I can remind you, there was a codes relational model that came about 50 years ago, where it's stated, future users of large data banks must be protected from having to know how the data is organized in the machine, the internal representation, right? And goes on to describe the need for data independence. This is exactly what Solid ecosystem, Sir Tim Berners-Lee and the whole team around Solid work towards. But where are we actually now, 50 years after that codes relational model? Future users of large data banks must be protected from having to know how the data is organized in the application, the internal representation. And we need to define application independence. The reason why we continue our 40-year-old quest of data integration with the same old techniques is because we live with an application-centric mindset. And that's exactly what needs to change. Data must have a well-defined meaning for the consumers independent of application. So societal transformation lag behind technological breakthroughs. And I think we need to do our best. The libraries especially can be of help in moving this forward. Thank you very much. I will hand it back to Chris now. I think you muted, Chris.
Yes, I am muted. Sorry about that. Thank you so much, Violetta. I think we can all agree that we don't want to be unimaginative, but I really appreciated your talk. So with that, we are going to move on to our third speaker, who is Jeff Oliver. He's a data science specialist at the University of Arizona Libraries, where he trains researchers in computer programming and data visualization. Before joining the library, he worked in the areas of bioinformatics and evolutionary biology.
Thanks, Chris. I want to start by thanking the organizers, and especially thanks for Chris and Terry for moderating this panel session. It's been great so far. Looking forward to the rest of it as well. So I am going to talk today about human capital and the importance of the libraries in developing the capacity for computational literacy on a campus and the role that libraries can play. Now, we've seen from a couple reports that when we look at things like data wrangling and data cleaning, there are estimates that somewhere between 25 and 75% of a data scientist's time is spent just cleaning up data. And I think that tomorrow's date provides a really good case in point. So if we look at 7/1, many of us will look at that and say, oh, that's July 1st. But I think there's probably some in the audience that might look at that and say, that's January 7th. And so I provide this as an example of a really bad way of representing data because it's ambiguous and we don't actually know, is this July 1st or January 7th? And many folks on campuses don't actually know how to write date formats in an easily computable way. And so, and I want to say that it's not just a matter of the proper date formats, that the types of data literacy and computational literacy demands that are out there are legion. And for the most part, the needs for training are far outstripping the actual demand. And so when I say that, one of the things that I want to call out is that there is an increased push to have more data scientists to be trained, to get a pipeline of data scientists. And I think that's great, but it's not enough. And I think that across all professions, what we need to do is dedicate time to training more people with data literacy, with data science skills, so that we can facilitate that communication and operation among sort of boots on the ground clinicians and researchers with data scientists. So the question now then is, what is the role of the libraries? And I think that prompts two questions. So libraries can help supply training, and they can actually address those unmet needs in data and computational literacy. But this question then prompts a second question, which is, how can libraries themselves develop the expertise to address those unmet needs in data and computational literacy? So considering just that first question about how do we address unmet needs on a campus, I would argue that the place to start is the Carpentries. So the Carpentries is a nonprofit organization that provides training and curriculum, and this is key, they provide curriculum as well, for foundational programming and data skills for researchers. It's important to note that the Carpentries is not data science, or is not computer science. So there is no recursion in Carpentries lesson. There are no hash tables. That's not the role of the Carpentries. What it is a means of creating an on-ramp for the skills that are increasingly necessary to do any kind of research. So these materials are community developed and community revised, community curated, and they're also all open source. So you can use them as long as you provide credit to the Carpentries organization. You can actually use all of their lessons as one-offs or individual instructional tools. They're also designed to actually foster a mindset for lifelong learning. So it's not just a matter of teaching people the commands, teaching people which buttons to push on the computer, but actually how to facilitate and foster this mindset to continue learning outside of Carpentries workshops. And these Carpentries workshops start with things like, how do you use spreadsheet programs effectively, all the way up through introductions of scripting languages such as R and Python. I'd say if you're curious to look at what the Carpentries can offer, start with the ecology lesson for in-data carpentry. And then if you're ready to move on, look at the genomics lesson, which includes actual shell scripting in the bash shell. So the Carpentries, though, are a start. So they are generally 2-day workshops. And then after those workshops, folks need opportunities to then continue developing their skills. And so what can libraries do to facilitate that next step? And I would argue that getting involved with communities of practice, there are growing communities of practice for things like the R programming language and the Python programming languages. Get integrated with those communities of practice. And there's a variety of ways to do that. One of the things libraries can do is provide physical space for meeting. Maybe not right this moment, but in the future, they will be able to provide more physical space for meetups and meetings, providing logistical support as well. One of the things that's important to remember about these these communities of practice and helping this these folks level up in their skills is that it does require some degree of patience. So announcing that you're doing our programming, it's going to take a little while to get folks adopted, and there are a variety of reasons for that. But just, I would say, be patient, and folks will actually increasingly start to recognize the resources libraries offer. It's also important to understand the campus landscape. So even though the libraries cannot do everything, the libraries might know what resources are out there, so that if a researcher comes to a librarian and needs to know about statistical consulting, the library doesn't offer those services, know who on campus does. The same goes for high performance computing, as well as data storage options. So understanding the landscape to know where to refer folks when they have those computational questions is going to be critical to providing quality level support. Now, this talks about the unmet needs and how we can support them on campus, but this leads directly to the next question, which is how can libraries support those needs? So there really is a significant amount of expertise in order to provide quality support in things like coding and data literacy. In many ways, both literally and figuratively, these are new languages. And so we need to be sure that the people who are providing the support in the library are qualified to actually do that, to provide support in computational and data literacy. That the quote, by the way, on the slide is something I got from a paper that was recommending how libraries can help out in bioinformatics support. So I don't agree with this review, but I do recognize that it's important to provide expertise in the library staff who are providing support in this area. So where do we start for training library folks? And I would say we start with, again, the carpentries. There is a whole suite of lessons in the library carpentry materials that is developed both for and by people in the library and information professions. It covers a variety of topics, including also some R programming, databases. But I would say if you're curious, start with Tidy Data for Librarians. This lesson is a means of introducing spreadsheet programs and how to use them effectively, and really how to use them in a way to make those data computable, to make them easy for other folks to use in an automated fashion. And I should say, even though the title of the lesson is Tidy Data for Librarians, it certainly does not just apply to librarians. It could be useful across professions. So professional development of folks who work in the libraries is great, but it does take time. So a carpentry workshop might be 2 days, but there's the other 363 days out of the year. And so how do we support professional development? There was a great paper a couple years ago by Bethany Nowicki talking about digital humanities in the libraries, and how in the digital humanities unit, library staff had 20% of their time for self-directed professional development. Now, 20% is a lot of time. And I think that's one of the challenges we face with professional development, is that 20% is nice, but unfortunately, the work doesn't usually go away. And so how do we actually balance those two situations where we want folks to continuously up-level and continuously learn new things, but at the same time maintaining all of the responsibilities that they already have? And that's a challenge. Sorry, I don't have the answer for that, but this is a challenge when you're looking at professional development for existing library staff. So complementary to professional development opportunities, I want to also think about the way we hire people for library positions, especially when we think about data service areas. So this is a minimum qualifications from a recent Research Data Services librarian ad. And I would argue that the restriction to the MLIS as the very first minimum qualification is going to turn away qualified applicants. It's a fairly exclusive minimum qualification. And so what I would argue is that we transition for these roles to more inclusive hiring qualifications to recognize other potential advanced degrees that can prepare folks to be qualified for these positions. These are the other 4 folks who work in the data unit that I'm part of, I should say. Among all 5 of us, there are 5 advanced degrees, but only one of them is a library degree. Now, I say that recognizing that this is a cultural shift. So this is not a completely widely accepted idea to start hiring folks in positions with things like a PhD degree instead of a library and information sciences degree. So it will take some cultural socialization, and I recognize that. But regardless of how we provide library expertise, however we actually level up the folks who work in the libraries, I want to reiterate this demand for data and computational skills. So folks are really hungry for this, and libraries have an awesome opportunity to engage in broad swaths of the campus community. So as long as we can create a positive learning environment and promote things like a growth mindset, we can foster better practices, if not best practices, for how campus members actually deal with data. And I think this is ultimately going to create a landscape of better health outcomes. And that's the role that the libraries can play. I want to close just by once again thanking the organizers of the panel, Chris and Terry, for moderating. I also want to call out especially Jerry Perry, who invited me and provided this opportunity to speak with you all today. And then finally, I want to thank Anthony with Russell Video for providing logistics support. And at that, I'll turn it back to Chris. And I'll go ahead and start by saying, Chris, unmute your microphone.
Nice, thank you. I'm a big fan of Jerry Perry too, and I'm also a big fan of the Carpentries, all of them. And our library and the University of California are actively promoting them in California libraries wide and far. So with that, we're going to move to our last speaker. I'd like to invite you once again to send your questions in through the chat. Terry is collecting them and collating them, and we'll be asking our panelists your questions in just a few minutes. But our last speaker today is Bart Reagan. He's the Associate Director of Knowledge Integration, Research and Technology at the University of Virginia's Claude Moore Health Sciences Library. He also serves as the Director of Strategic Development at the Translational Health Research Institute of Virginia. Bart?
Great. Thank you, Chris. So today I'm going to talk about gatekeeper, creator, or consumer. What is the future, I guess, of the library? Let me get on the right screen. There we go. Okay, so I just want to step back and think about libraries and what we've been for the last 500 years or so. And really, we have been gatekeepers of knowledge. So in the pre-internet world, we were physical places that you often had to come to access this knowledge. You may have had to talk to somebody who helped you gain access to that knowledge or help you to discover that knowledge. Of course, the internet changed everything, and that really consumerized the way that people access information. It put access to information in the hands of the people, for good or bad. But that began to challenge sort of how libraries operate and how information is gained. I will note in our world, in biomedical library worlds, in 2000, there was an article from Dr. Davidoff and Florence calling for a new profession in the middle of clinical care. And basically what they were saying is that since you're increasing all this knowledge and there's so much knowledge out there, we need a profession that's out there with the clinical team that can sort of reach into the knowledge base and then provide the relevant knowledge at the time of clinical care. And that left a lot of librarians at the time sort of scratching their heads and saying, wait, isn't that what we do? But my point here is that this really kind of shows how internet and information technologies are challenging a lot of industries, and that libraries are adapting and have had to adapt and will continue to need to adapt all the way in the future. And of course, none of the change stopped in 2000. I mean, now we have mobile computable biomedical knowledge, we have machine learning, we have AI, we have AR, we have semantic web, we have a host of technologies that continue to impact libraries and how we provide our services. So let me start with a simple example. And this one I'm mostly familiar with from work I do here at UVA. Many years ago, we got involved with a project with one of our schools to work on a collaboration discovery system. And I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with Vivo and semantic web type of technologies. Our interest and our expertise was understanding the publication data. Now, eventually, this project ended up not going really anywhere. But we ended up with a license for this resource for a number of years. And our library became very interested in how we might be able to use this information to the benefit of our patron base. And that's through the the point of this publication impact service. And so for us, really our area of interest was how can we provide better publication data to individuals going up for promotion and tenure, or departments or schools, so that they can demonstrate the impact of the work that they do. Now to get there, we actually had to work on other data sources. So it really became, how do we combine and merge data sources in ways that make our ability to do our service a lot more impactful. And the first place we had to start was the HR feed. And you would think that 6 years ago that you could press a button and sort of spit out a list of all the faculty at a particular university. But what we really discovered is that in each school, in each location, they were described differently, because all these schools sort of grew up in these technologies that started probably in the mid-90s up through the 2000s. And so there were no standards. And so we had to really work through the issues about who are our faculty, what are the criteria that meet it, which faculty are we looking for? So for example, we weren't interested in emeritus faculty because we're looking at information that's going on right now. And then we began to marry this information with other data sources like grant data. And when it became time to renew the contract, we were able to sort of stitch together enough resources to do so because we were selling not a product here, but we were selling what we call a source of truth. And so as we clean our HR data and our publication data and get good access to grant data, it doesn't make sense for us to do it, for some other unit to do the same thing, for a third unit to do the same thing. As we change and curate our data, we want everybody to benefit from it. And so basically our philosophy was, we'll curate the data, we're going to clean the feeds, we're going to collect the data once as much as possible and use it as many times as possible. And therefore we'll create consumers of data. And so where we're at right now is that we have a couple of data use cases. One is our publication impact service. Another is a great partner of ours, which is the Vice President of Research. And they now have a interdisciplinary seed funding called Three Cavaliers. And how Three Cavaliers works is you need 3 different faculty members on any one project, but 2 of them have to be from different schools. And so they started using our HR data and our publication data to help other faculty understand the expertise in the other schools. So if you're the cardiologist wanting to work on a heart catheter, how do you find the material scientist in the engineering school with the expertise that you need? They in turn work with their partners at the provost office to create a faculty directory. And so let me be clear here, like this is the same data. It's one data for a variety of purposes. And so what you end up doing is you're putting a lens on top of the data and then able to sort of pull it out and then reconfigure that for the particular purpose that you were trying to do, which may be different than the purpose that I'm trying to do. The last 2, one is another school. We're working with them on a research faculty directory where they're going to put their own interface on top of it. And then the last one is a headless Drupal instance for another school, which I just love that phrase. But you may know Drupal as a web content management platform. They're not using Drupal as a means to serve up web pages. They're using Drupal as a means to sort of do their own data manipulation on the back end. They can take our data, they combine it with their local data, and then they spit that out into sort of internal and external products based on whatever they're trying to accomplish. And I just think that's truly fantastic. Here's our data model. There's no rocket science here. Basically, we're taking in the HR data. I will say that we also had to, we've been through 2 different HR systems, so we had to migrate data from one data to the next system. But as we do this, we get cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. We're getting OSP data, sponsors program data from our local tool, Research UVA. We take publication data from PubMed, Crossref. We marry the grant data with dimensions data, which gives us access to augment the local data with external data from Federal Reporter. And then we're investigating ways that we can then open this up back to that open source environment in ways that make sense. So we know that a number of researchers are using ORCID. We know that ORCID will be increasingly important to NIH. And so we're trying to figure out how can we create bidirectional data flows that allow their data to enhance our data, but also to let our data to enhance their data as well. Again, why ask a faculty member or somebody to enter data in 2 different places? Because they're never going to keep it up. You'll be lucky if you get them to do it once. And so speaking of open source, I do want to sort of mention another project that's being done by a researcher here at the School of Data Science at UVA. This is Scolia, and Scolia is based on the Wikidata and WikiCite platform, with the idea that as academics, especially public academic institutions, we are quite often creating information and content and then handing it over to some third party for them to own. The idea behind Scholia is that as we're creating the information, let's capture the scholarly output of our individual faculty members and our schools and everybody else at the institution so that we can then open that up to other sources. And again, you'd be able to access Scholia data either through their interface or through an API and repurpose it. So now I'd like to turn a little bit towards a more complex example, two of them actually, around machine learning or artificial intelligence. So the National Library of Medicine has quite rightly recognized early in the 90s that there were resource issues about the amount and volume of content being created versus their ability to apply human resources towards cataloging or indexing this content. And so they started the Indexing Initiative Project in the 1990s. The primary product today is the Medical Text Indexer. This started in 2002, and then the current framework is built on technology from 2013. So again, you can see their progress of trying to figure out, all right, how as the amount of information is being created, can we then keep up with this in ways that make sense and actually help us display this information back out to all the users. So MTI first line indexing partially automates the standard indexing process, and it produces both semi and fully automatic indexing recommendations based on mesh control vocabulary. And again, if you know the biomedical world, you know mesh is very important, and we leverage that structure every day in our work. And again, we're handing this sort of pre-made work to somebody at the end of the line so that they can use it in their indexing, their catalogers, or their history of medicine division. The other example, which I just think is super creative, is this project that came out of the University of North Carolina Health Sciences Library. In 2019, they presented at the Medical Library Association, harnessing the power of AI and machine learning to change the way we approach large, complex research questions. So again, you know, if I'm doing a systematic review or some other large comprehensive search where I actually want everything, give me everything. The broader the net I cast, the more noise that I'm going to introduce into the system. What are these sort of automated ways that we can programmatically begin to filter or cluster or segment this information so that a librarian can then come in, or a researcher can then come in and understand what are the patterns that we're trying to understand. And I just want to give a huge amount of credit to Michelle Colley. When we saw this at MLA at UVA, we were like, oh, gosh, I really wish we had thought of that idea, because I think it was truly innovative when it comes to library. And to the right there on that slide, you will see the entire team that worked on this at UNC. So the premise here is that you cast that wide net, you build that search, and you built it on those search terms that you normally would. You use some sort of text analysis to try and figure out what is the pattern that's emerging from there. Use some AI to try and remove the large number of duplicates. Again, think about it. If you're getting tens of thousands of search results, that's a lot of going through by hand. And if it's a person that's doing this, you're going to introduce human error into the process. How can we automate that as much as possible? And then once you get those results, how can I then look at those patterns, apply some machine learning, look for those clusters, and then again, bring it back to that analysis phase so that you can sort of see what is going on there in the data. And so what is truly sort of fascinating to me here is if the content creator, if we look at NLM as a content creator, and they're creating this pool of records that we all use, and that they're using machine learning techniques to sort of get through this, it's not that hard of a leap to imagine that 3-5 years from now, that the technology's at a point where it can just do it without the aid of humans. The same thing could be true for the project that UNC is working on, where if the standards are in existence from how the data is created, we're now going to build the information systems that let us sort of hook into those standards and pull out those meaningful results in a much more efficient and maybe even effective ways. There's a long way to go, I think, with these technologies, but this is absolutely what we're talking about with the future and the future of technology and libraries. I do want to recognize as we talk about the coolness of all these tools and where this technology is taking us, that we have to recognize the biases that we're creating in the systems. And I think you see this in Amazon, Google, Facebook, and a lot of the big industries. I mean, Amazon certainly looking at recruiting a recruitment tool that showed the bias against hiring women because there was a bias in hiring women for certain positions in their organization. So we have to mitigate some of these processes that we've created over the period of time. But I think we'll hone these processes as we learn more and more how to utilize them. I will mention that Patty Brenneman has explicitly stated AI is coming, and I think you probably heard that in her talk leading up to this one, and asking us, are our data ready? But also acknowledging for this to work, it really needs to be that the data are accurate and that the data are unbiased. And sort of close out here, what is my grand prediction for libraries? I don't think there really is a grand prediction here. The prediction is we're going to continue to some degree to be gatekeepers, curators, and consumers of knowledge. But I really honestly believe that our lives and our jobs are going to look very, very different in the near future, especially in the next 5 to 10 years. So what do I mean by that? I'm thinking that we may code the next generation search interfaces. And I think you certainly see libraries doing that in academic settings. I think we talk about consuming and creating and mashing up data. Violetta was, I think, alluding to some of that. And how can we as librarians help people connect with external and internal data sources that help them mash that up in meaningful ways? We're going to be scraping and archiving institutional data off the internet. My library is currently doing this through our historical collections unit, where they're actually archiving all the Twitter feeds and everything related to COVID, to UVA, to our local communities, so that we have these institutional records that are going to be mined 10, 20, 50 years from now. We're going to create those standards, alluding to what Christy was talking about. How do we get those sort of standards around data sets? And again, what I want to be in everything is I want to be the consumer of this data. So I want somebody else or a group of people to put this data out there for me to be able to reach in and to figure out how can I display this in ways that's useful here at UVA. And I expect other institutions to want to do the same thing. Or are we developing algorithms to automate previously labor-intensive processes that maybe had to be done by hand or by human at one point, but at some point we can figure out how to automate. And so libraries, I hope and wish and think that libraries will do what they continue to do for the last 50 years, which is to pivot around those technological innovations. And if we are able to do that, then I really believe that we'll be able to adopt the best practices and help our sciences and our society to continue to move forward. And I'll turn that back over to Chris.
It looks like they turned it over to Terry. So I will introduce, I don't know if you can hear me, but I will introduce Terry Wheeler, our moderator for the question and answer session, and close out Bart's topic by saying that libraries are most definitely pivoting to take advantage of new technologies. And our library is working with the Internet Archive to archive the web history of our institution, but also working with the Internet Archive in our community to archive the Bay Area's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and also the Black Lives Matter pandemic, and many others. So with that, I'll turn it over to Terry for our question and answer session.
Sure, and thank you very much, Chris, and everyone, please be sure to keep sending your questions. So we have a question for Christy. Christy, when you deal with varying use cases, have you encountered a scenario where use cases overlap? And if you have, how do you deal with moving knowledge to performance in such cases?
Sure, that's a great question. Thank you. So I regularly am faced with that scenario because we will find, particularly because of our infrastructure role on campus, we're presented with opportunities to connect with a number of different stakeholders or in different situations. So for example, a good example of that would be the work that we do around continuous improvement and evaluation. The lessons that we've learned there through trying to optimize our data workflows and analytical and data presentation workflows has allowed us to be able to then enable reuse of some of those workflows and continued optimization. This is particularly, I think, helpful in the way that we're thinking about metrics, research communication impact through the library, and has enabled us to be able to pull in a way, signal out of noise. So we take aggregate publication data, we look at how research is being leveraged and applied, and then we're able to see those more meaningful indicators of impact that go beyond publication counts into changes in the way that we are behaving, the way that we are treating patients, the impact of our community. So I think there are regular opportunities to learn and to be able to improve on these processes across different disciplines and with stakeholders, and we actively look for those opportunities. Thank you.
Thanks, Christy. Another question has come in for Violetta. Violetta, how would co-production of data and views and queries by multiple people unfold in an environment of the decentralized web? In other words, with co-production of research outputs by multiple stakeholders.
Thank you. This is an excellent question. So the coupling of the data and applications that I was mentioning allows the user to control access to their data, right? And allows the data from various applications to be cross-linked, which means that in a collaborative environment, let's say a collaborative paper or a whatever else collaborative effort you want to imagine, each collaborator has its own data pod where all of the comments, all of the notifications, all of the contributions are stored, and there are separate inboxes for all of those, and all of those events, let's call them events, they have unique resource identifier, because here we are talking about semantic web and linked data. And some of the protocols that enable this that are already available from the W3C consortium are linked data notification protocol, WebSub, and ActivityPub. And they're detailed, you can look them up on the W3C website, the standards and how that works. But if I may be so humble, I can refer you to the paper, like a general overview paper I co-wrote with a colleague from University of Amsterdam. I believe the paper, we called it Information Sharing Pipeline. It's available on as a open preprint through OSF, where we basically provide an overview of these three standards and how the data sharing and how the whole interaction will happen in this environment. But the basic point is that this is all RDF. This is a research description framework. This is linked data and semantic web, and that's why these standards will work. I hope this answered the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Violetta. And now we have a question for Bart. Bart, how might text analysis or natural language processing impact information discovery systems?
Good one to think about. Yeah, I think text analysis and NLP are going to help us see the patterns that we wouldn't normally be able to see otherwise. I mean, the thing about, if you think about reviewing data as one particular document at a time, it's going to be really, really difficult to see the patterns that are existing in the data. And so if you go back and the links, I assume my slides will be shared at some point with the registrants, but if you go to the UNC document, the website that I linked to, they have a lot more information about how they're looking at some of these pattern recognitions. And so it may just be looking for like words that are used within certain proximity or certain phrasing, and the reoccurrence of those will be sort of a first step in understanding like what patterns are emerging. And then from that, I think you can then use clustering algorithms to try and determine what patterns actually exist. And so I hope that is somewhat answering the question, but that's how I see things. And then of course, natural language processing, we see this more and more in the Google age. To what degree can we get to the point where I ask my question and I don't have to know the 20 different variants of terminology, that the technology's knowledgeable enough to sort of understand the underlying information that I'm trying to get to. And I'm thinking about the differences and even the information between something like ICD-9 versus ICD-10 and the how many more terms there were in ICD-10. I think the technologies, and this is a little bit beyond the scope of my knowledge, but the technologies will help us identify those patterns and those clusters a lot more quickly and efficiently in the future.
Thank you very much, Bart. So I have another question for Jeff. Jeff, how can libraries help educate researchers around questions of reproducibility and the ethics of data use and data reuse?
Thanks for that, Terry. I think this is a really good question. I also think that I think libraries have actually already been doing a really good job of this. I think that thinking about the ways we use data and how we can ethically reuse data has been sort of a hallmark of the libraries. They've been actually leaders in this area. I think continuing along that work is a good idea. So working with things like institutional review boards and access to data in a way that is not exploitive. I also think that Violetta and Christy touched on a couple of really useful ideas, which is around open science and the open science framework and fair data use principles. I think continuing to provide support and education opportunities in those areas are going to help out a lot. I know that at the University of Arizona, our research data management specialist, Fernando Rios, provides a lot of support in the use of the open science framework, as well as in data management support to really emphasize the FAIR principles. And sometimes this is explicit, and you will write out the word FAIR and explain what it is. But a lot of times it's either implicit or almost subversive, where when you tell someone something is a best practice, it can sort of just go right by, and they just sort of like, oh, roll their eyes, best practice. But when you can demonstrate something or a principle and demonstrate the utility of it, and how either it's going to make your life easier when you want to do this again in 2 to 4 to 6 months, or if you want your grant renewed, you're going to have to make your data available. So sort of a combination of carrots and sticks, then I think it can help impress the importance and the utility of those best practices around both reproducibility and ethics of data use.
Thank you very much, Jeff. So we have another question for Christy. Christy, can you give an example of collaboration where challenges are both technical and cultural? And what did you learn? And this question seems particularly appropriate at this time in our society.
Yes, thank you very much. So I was struck by the comments by my co-panelists. It seems to continue to come back to this concept of culture, and I think that interface between cultural or the social aspects and the technological constructs that we're dealing with continue to present new challenges. So A good example of this right now would probably be a project that we're working on in coordination. This is being led by Matt Carson, who leads all of our data and informatics efforts at Galter Library through something called the Data Lab. And so that's a way of pulling together these related activities. And it is generously supported through an NNLM award from the University of Iowa. And so what we're doing here is to be able to build materials in order to support training around clinical data. And so that is everything from supporting learning how to feel comfortable writing SQL queries to the clinical context of the questions that people are trying to ask, being able to support reproducible workflows through vetting some of these SQL queries and being able to test them, being able to reuse them in an easy and efficient way, and then being able to leverage something like the repository so that it can be a place to store it, to store these materials and collected materials, versions of them, supporting versioning, and then also being able to recognize the people who put the work in and credit that work. So it's, it kind of is that certainly the technical component of how to do the work, but it's the cultural context of how do I do this in a way that isn't overly burdensome? How do I recognize that I put a lot of time into this and I want to get credit for this and I want to be able to have a way to highlight this great work? And then it's also the kind of cultural aspects of having conversations with stakeholders on campus about data and issues around privacy and security, and so it's been a really rich space that we've been fortunate to collaborate on through partnerships on campus, like with our enterprise data warehouse and other partners. But it's an ongoing journey, so we're continuing to learn and we're looking forward. This is still in early stages. It was funded not long ago, but we've already learned a lot and looking forward to sharing that as we move through the project.
Thank you so much, Christy. So our next question goes to Bart. Bart, was it hard to convince people that the library should be the owner of the data?
Actually, I've been trying to convince people that the library is not the owner of the data for a long time. We accidentally got involved in this project because we were asked to. Well, we were trying to highlight sort of the value of collaboration discovery, and we had some leadership changes, and the license was signed for a particular period of time, and so we kept it up. But it was really advantageous that we kept it up when we did, because then our library was going through a CTSA application, and they need access to some data for collaboration discovery, and I was able to come in and sort of explain, like, here's a data model and stuff like that. So I've actually actively been working for the last year or so with our VPR's office and trying to educate people that we're actually not the owner of the data, that we are a service provider. We help keep the data clean, but that the owner of the data are the faculty. The owner of the data are the schools. The owner of the data is the provost office. And to be honest, like, our goal here is that one day we'll be able to sort of hand off this tool, this product, or this data source, the source of truth, to a higher entity.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us. We are back on track. I'm going to now kick it over to Chuck to introduce our next panel. Chuck, please take it away.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I apologize for that interruption. I wish I could blame it on lightning in Ann Arbor, but the weather is beautiful here. So it obviously had some other cause. We apologize, and I just want to apologize especially to our terrific panelists from the Library of the Future, because we obviously were not able to finish that session. We were in a lively Q&A, and I hope we can do as we did with Patty Brennan's session, to scrape the questions that were not yet asked and answered and put them to the panel, and get some responses to those questions to you all fairly soon.